Anybody got any song requests out there? It's Friday, people. How we doing out there? Good morning. Good morning. We're learning about bank balance sheets today, which is pretty fun to learn about, I would suggest. It's going to be pretty fun. We're just going to do a little accounting today. I'm going to show you guys 3 bank balance sheets, and you're going to try your own. That is the game plan today. Well, welcome on in, people. Glad you're here. Glad you're here. How we doing out there? On a fine Friday, people, we only got 2 more weeks. We only got 2 more weeks, and it's gonna fly. Oh, people, did you guys see that I got the Christmas tree all lit up over there? Looking pretty nice. Looking pretty nice. You know, we're getting festive. We're decorating a little bit. You know, man. Is the audio all good? Music too loud? You got me, Zaid. All right. Couple announcements. The big announcement is Unit 3 test retakes will be available. Yes, everything's good. Will be available today. All right. So after school today, at 2 o'clock, I will, open up the Unit 3 test retake for you to take, which also means I'm going to close the other Unit 3 test. Right. So if you haven't looked at your Unit 3 test yet, and you don't know what you got wrong, right, I would suggest you do that before 3 o'clock. Right before 3 o'clock, because I'm going to close that and I'm going to open up the new test, obviously, right? It's very similar to the old test, but I definitely changed a lot of things around, so I'm going to have to close the old one first. Who it's coming from? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah. Aside from that, I'll post the 4.3 answer key more on Google Meet later today. 4.4 is going to be due tonight. That's what you were doing yesterday. That was the money multiplier assignment. And then 4.5 is going to be one bank balance sheet. Most of you guys will be able to finish that before 12 o'clock. And you'll be on your way to enjoy a nice weekend. All right. And then I'm thinking Monday next week we're going to learn about bank balance sheets a little bit. Probably do a little more practice with it. We'll kind of see where we're at after today. And then we only have really one more concept to learn about in Unit 4. That's the loanable funds market. And then we'll review Unit 4, and then we'll start Unit 5, which is very, very short. Unit 5 will probably take us about 4 days. 4 days to do. And then we're pretty much done. And then what's going to be the final exam, people? A 200 multiple choice test. And you only have an hour to complete it. Good luck. I'm just kidding. All right. So let's get to some attendance in the chat. Your attendance in the chat today is, what is your favorite snack food? What is your favorite snack food? Like if you're not trying to eat a meal, but you're hungry, right? And you're trying to eat it like just, something chill, something small. What do you usually, what's your go-to, right? Mine would have to be grapes, specifically purple grapes, not the green ones. The green ones are alright, but like grapes. I like grapes a lot. It's a nice light snack that tastes pretty good, I think. Is the coffee shop open? Oh, yeah. Oh, man, this is easy for you guys. Pop-Tart. Aiden says seaweed. Seaweed is super, super healthy for you. Aiden, like straight up seaweed or what? Is it like dried? Is it salted? It can't just be like pure seaweed, right? It's got to be done up a little bit, right? No. Pringles. Ooh, Sophie says birthday cake Oreos. Actually, that actually is one of my favorite. You would never think, but I do like birthday cake Oreos. Chex Mix. A lot of you guys are saying Chex Mix over here. Kyle says chips. What kind of chips, Kyle? What kind of chips? You got Doritos. You got, barbecue, Lay's, right? What kind of chips? Riley said popcorn. That's a good one. Popcorn, I think, actually is pretty healthy for you, too. I'm not like healthy, but it's not unhealthy for you. It's not that bad. Cheez-Its. Ooh, I like Cheez-Its. I like Cheez-Its a lot, Jack. Strawberry shortcake Pop-Tarts. Ooh. Pop-Tarts are pretty good. I haven't had Pop-Tarts in a while, though. Cheez-Its. Nathan says fruit. Yeah, I kind of like fruit. I like fruit because it fills you up and, you don't really feel, awful afterwards. Strawberries. Pretzels or grapes. Grapes are the best. Peanut butter. English muffin. Peanut butter English muffin. Cheez-Its. Fruit. Rice Krispie. Pomegranate seeds. Ooh, that's pretty healthy for you. Allison says Shawn Mendes. Who's Shawn Mendes, though? I don't know who this guy is. Does he go to Grand Blanc? Is he in your guys' grade? Who's Shawn Mendes? I don't know. Goldfish, roasted salted. Oh, with the seaweed. Yeah. I was gonna say you gotta have something to it, right? Because if you're eating straight up seaweed and you like it, that's the most healthiest thing you can ever do. Goldfish, man, I haven't had goldfish since I was a little whippersnapper. Wrong account again. Oops. Oh, that's on you. Hershey. Ooh, chocolate candy. It's a good snack. Cookies. Pecans or dried fruit. Chicken and rice. Chicken and rice, man, that's like a meal. Or are you responding to something else I asked about? Real boy cheesy biscuit. What do you mean chicken and rice? That's a meal. Spicy sweet chili Doritos. Yeah, those are good. That's what I'm talking about, Kyle. Pretzels. Yeah, I don't know who Shawn Mendes is. All right. You guys ready? You guys ready to get into it? You guys ready? You ready? I only got half a coffee left. I'm gonna get through this. All right, people. Make sure you guys are putting your attendance in the chat. Some of you guys are not, and I find you on Google Meet. So how do I know if you're not sleeping the whole time, right? And you just pop in around 11:40. I'm on to you, all right? I'm on to you. All right, let's get into it, people. Hey, extra credit to anyone out there who wants to make me a playlist that is school appropriate, that doesn't have annoying songs in it. Yeah. Contact me later about it. I love a cool playlist. I usually ask students for playlists, and they always give me I don't know, like songs that are really like you'd hear on a really mainstream radio sort of thing, right? I don't know about that. I want some weird songs, All right, let's get going, people. Let's get going about bank balance sheets. All right, before we talk about bank balance sheets, so there's one concept we need to learn about before we can get into the bank balance sheets, because it is a concept that is asked a lot on bank balance sheet FRQs. All right, and that is, what is the relationship between bond prices and interest rates? All right, so we talked a little bit about what a bond is yesterday, right? A bond, or 2 days ago, no, yesterday, right? A bond is simply an IOU, right? If the government issues a bond, right, you're buying the bond, you're giving the government money, so therefore you're lending money to the government, right? And the government's going to use that money to finance some sort of, government operation, right? Building roads or funding a war or whatever the case may be, right? Since you're lending the money to the government, right, they're going to give you that money back, of course, plus an interest rate, right? So all bonds have some sort of rate of return that goes with them. Sometimes they're kind of complex because it depends upon how long the length of the bond is and whatnot, but every bond has some sort of rate of return, some sort of interest rate on it. And it just simply is an IOU. It's just simply, lending money is all it is, right? And you can buy bonds from corporations. You can buy bonds from startup companies called junk bonds. And bond is just simply an IOU, right? So The bond price, right, is the value of the bond, right? How much you buy the bond for, right? So if I buy a government bond for $100, right, $100 is the bond price, all right? So I'm buying a government bond. I'm giving the government $100. They're going to give me $100 plus interest once the bond matures, right, after a few years. So how are bond prices and interest rates related? So if interest rates change in the economy, right, in other words, money supply changes or maybe money demand changes, right, and interest rates are to change, that's going to obviously influence the price, the value of previously issued bonds, all right? So let's run through this example real quick. It says, assume a 30-year U.S. Treasury bond, and sometimes bonds are also called securities, right, just to make sure. It has a face value of $1,000. All right, so someone bought the bond for $1,000, and they're expected to get $1,000 back plus 5% interest on that bond. Okay, so after 30 years, you're gonna get a whopping, $50 is the idea. So if interest rates change in the economy, right? If interest rates go from 5% to 3%, which bond would you rather have, right? Would you rather have the old bond that has a rate of return of 5%, or would you rather have a new bond that has a rate of return of 3%, right? Which bond is more attractive? All right. The bond that's more attractive is the higher yield, right? The bond that has the highest interest rate. So if interest rates change and now the Federal Reserve is only issuing bonds at 3%, right? People are going to want that 5% bond more than the new bonds. So what's going to happen to the value of your bond? If you wanted to sell your bond privately, just somebody else, you can sell your government bonds to other people privately if you wish, right? If you wanted to sell this $1,000 bond to somebody else, right, that gets a 5% interest rate, and now $1,000 bonds are being issued at 3%, right? People are going to pay more than $1,000 for your bond. That's the idea, right? If interest rates go down and now bonds are being issued at lower interest rates, the previously held bonds, the old issued bonds, the ones that have 5% rate of returns on those, are going to become more valuable. That's the idea. So if interest rates decrease, old bonds, previously issued bonds, increase in value. The price, in other words, right? If someone paid to buy your bond from you, they would have to pay a higher price, right? Because your bond is more valuable. That's the idea. Is bond prices and interest rates are inversely related. And what I mean by that is bond prices of previously issued bonds are inversely related to interest rates if interest rates change. Okay? So what you usually see is you're going to be given a money market shifter, generally money supply, and you're going to get a change to, the money market, right? So interest rates are going to change. And then whatever happens to interest rates, right? If interest rates increase, you're going to say bond prices decrease. Because, alternatively, right, if interest rates go from 5% to 10%, and you want to get out of your bond, you want to sell your bond, people aren't going to pay $1,000 for your 5% bond when they can just go to the Fed and buy a $1,000 bond at 10%, right? So if you want to sell your bond, you're going to have to take a lower price. That's the idea. Bond prices and interest rates are always inversely related. Just make sure you understand that. We're talking about previously issued bonds, the value of those bonds, and what you could get through those in the open market, right? In a private market. Okay? So let's see if you guys are picking up what I'm throwing down over here. It says, in the short run, which of the following would occur to bond prices and interest rates if a central bank bought bonds through open market operations? So open market operations simply is the buying and selling of bonds. The central bank is also known as the Federal Reserve, right? Just tons of vocab words kind of coming at you guys. So if the Fed buys bonds, what do? If the Fed buys bonds, that's going to increase the money supply, right? That's going to increase the money supply. Actually, hold on. We have technology now, people. We have more technology here, which is pretty sweet, right? So if the Fed buys bonds, interest rates, and remember, label this nominal interest rates, label this quantity of money, write it all out. We got money supply is vertical, we got money demand is downward sloping, and the Fed buys bonds, right? We know that when the Fed buys bonds, that is going to increase the money supply, right? They're buying the bonds. They're getting the bonds back from you. I'm giving the Fed the bond, the piece of paper, and they're giving me cash money for that, right? They're putting money into the system. That's going to increase the money supply. A lot of students read that as like, are you buying bonds, right? No, the Fed's buying bonds, therefore you're selling the bond back to the Fed, right? That you have already purchased beforehand. So yeah, interest rates most definitely decrease. So if interest rates decrease, bond prices have to increase. That's what we're doing, right? If interest rates change, right, based on a change to the money market, and they could change money supply or money demand, but usually it is the buying and selling of bonds, right? Bond prices are going to do the opposite, right? Because if you wanted to sell your bond privately, it's now more valuable because now the bonds that are being issued by the Fed are not as valuable, right? They don't have as high of a rate of return as your bond does. So, let's see. You guys probably don't even see the answers. Yeah, the answer is C. I think you got it right, Luke. Didn't you say C? I think you said C. You retracted your statement. If the Fed buys bonds, interest rates fall, thus increasing the price of bonds. All right, it's just going to be one of those items that you're going to see repeatedly on bank balance sheet FRQs. Right, they love asking it about on bank balance sheet FRQs, but I've also seen it on other, just money market FRQs. Right, you change money supply, interest rates change, and they're going to say, all right, what happens to bond prices? You just got to know that they're talking about prices of bonds that have already been previously purchased or held bonds by the public. All right, or the private sector. All right, so let's learn about bank balance sheets. Bank balance sheets are usually pretty fun, people, because we're not taking a bunch of notes or learning about a graph. We're just going to learn how to do a little bit of counting in a bank balance sheet, right, for a bank. We're doing accounting for a bank is what we're doing to kind of see all of the concepts that we've discussed already in Unit 4. All right, so some vocab you guys are going to see a lot. The first one is demand deposits. I've started trying to use this word a little bit, right, in lieu of checkable deposits or money in checking account. It is the same thing. A demand deposit is money in your checking account, okay? You just have to remember that, they're synonyms. Checkable deposits, demand deposits are the same thing, but usually on a bank balance sheet, it's going to be written as demand deposits, all right? It's just simply money in your checking account. I would imagine most of you guys probably have a checking account. Most of you guys probably have a checking account and a savings account, right? Most of you guys probably have a debit card, right? Perhaps, right? And, when you swipe your debit card, right, it's money straight out of your checking account. Demand deposits, right, remember, is M1 money. It's very liquid money. Money in your checking account is extremely liquid. You just got to swipe a card, you can make a transaction. It essentially is cash, which also is M1. Just remember, demand deposits is money in your checking account or checkable deposits. Required reserves, we've already talked about this a little bit, right? That is the ratio, that is the percentage that banks must hold on reserves, and that's related to the amount of money in checkable deposits, right? It's all in relation to people's money in their checking account. So if the reserve ratio is 10%, right, and someone deposits $100 in their checking account, right, the required reserves are going to increase by $10, right, if the reserve ratio is 10%. Reserves means cash. So required reserves is the amount of money that banks have to hold in relation to money in demand deposits based on the reserve ratio. And you guys are going to see that here in a second. It'll make a little bit more sense once you guys see it on paper. And then excess reserves, again, think about reserves as meaning cash. Excess reserves, excess cash, is cash that the money can do whatever they want, or the bank can do whatever they want, right? They can lend it out, right? They can use that cash to buy real estate. They can use that cash to buy bonds. They can use that cash for whatever means, right? It's just money that they are free to do whatever they so wish. And it is not the cash that is in required reserves. It's the other, So again, if someone puts $100 in their checking account and the reserve ratio is 10%, that means required reserves are going to increase by $10 of that $100 deposit, and then excess reserves that obviously increase by $90 for that $100 deposit, right? It's what's left over from the reserve ratio that is cash that the bank is free to use to make more money. So a bank balance sheet is just a record of all banks' assets, liabilities, and net worth. And we know that an asset, right, is something that, someone owns, right? A liability is what you owe. A lot of vocab words today, people. I hope you did the reading, right? Asset is what you own. A liability is what you owe, all right? So it says our demand deposits in a bank is money in a checking account in a bank, an asset or a liability. Well, it depends, right? Who are we talking about, right? Money in a checking account is a liability for a bank, right? Because if you walk into the bank and you want to get money out of your checking account, right, they owe you that money. They're responsible for paying you whatever money is in your checking account. So it is a liability for the bank, thus it is an asset for you, all right? So it kind of depends who owns it, who owes it. All right, so here's what a bank balance sheet looks like. We got assets and we got liabilities, right? Assets is what the bank, owns. Liabilities is what the bank owes. All right, so these are always going to balance, right? Because whatever money is put in is what the bank owns, right? Until someone wants it back, and then they're therefore going to have to owe it, right? So this bank balance sheet always has to be balanced, right? So when you make a change to one of these numbers, right? The other side of the T chart, sometimes it's called a T account, right? Because, a T chart, a T account, you're going to have to make sure it balances on the other side, right? Assets always have to equal liabilities. This is the world of accounting, all right? So it says, if the bank is holding no excess reserves, how much is the required reserve ratio, right? Based on here, well, actually I put excess reserves in here, so that doesn't really make any sense, but so generally, right, the first part of every bank balance sheet FRQ, you guys are going to see that today, is asking you, what is the reserve requirement, right? What is the reserve requirement? Assuming that, they're abiding by the law, right? Well, you just take this required reserves divided by demand deposits. So 500 divided by 5,000 is 10%. So therefore, we know that the required reserve ratio is 0.1 or 10%, because usually on a bank balance sheet, right, you're going to be asked questions to identify the money multiplier. You're going to use the money multiplier to answer a lot of questions that you guys saw yesterday. So, the money multiplier in this case would be 1 divided by 0.1. The money multiplier would therefore be 10. All right, so let's do some bank balance sheets, right? It's going to make a lot more sense as we do this, right? The only way to get good at bank balance sheets or accounting is just repetition, just to do a lot of it. So I'm going to do 3 bank balance sheets today. And then once we go to Google Meet, you guys will just do 1, and then we'll call it a day, right? And we'll pick up on this again on Monday. All right, so it says the following is a simplified balance sheet for MIT or a bank in the United States. And then again, you see assets and liabilities. You see that there's $100,000 of money in people's checking accounts, all their checking accounts added together. There's $100,000 that the bank is responsible. So if everyone that uses this bank walks into the bank and demands their money out of their checking account, the bank better come up with $100,000, right? That's the idea. Sometimes you see owner's equity in here, right? If the owner put any of his own money or he or she's own money in to the bank, right? Obviously the bank would owe that owner, right? They put in their own money equity. And then assets, right? So required reserves is the amount of cash that the bank has to hold in reserves by law. And then excess reserves is the amount of cash that the bank has that they're free to do whatever they want. Total reserves would be required plus excess. Sometimes you see total reserves asked a lot. Total reserves is just required plus excess. And it looks like currently this bank has $85,000 out currently in loans, right? So people are paying back $85,000 worth of loans, over time. And as they pay back those loans, the value of excess reserves would obviously increase, all right? So, so as people pay back these loans, right, loans are going to decrease, that money's going to get moved into excess, right? This whole thing always has to balance, all right? So just a couple of things, and you'll see other things today and other bank balance sheets, but it always has to have demand deposits, it always has to have reserves, and generally there's always loans out there, all right? And again, see how it equals $100,000. All right, so question A says, what is the reserve requirement based on this information, all right? Well, the reserve requirement has to be 10,000, right? Required reserves is 10,000 divided by the amount of money in demand deposits, right? Because that's what required reserves means. It's the amount of cash that the bank must hold by law in relation to how much money is in demand deposits. So it's $10,000 divided by $100,000. So we know that the reserve ratio or the reserve requirement is 10%, or you can write it in decimal form, 0.1. But you're going to need that information too later on generally. Okay, so that's the reserve requirement. That is a gimme. I would think you just always take required reserves divided by demand deposits, and that is how much the bank has to hold by law, because the bank is not going to hold any extra money in required reserves that they don't have to, right? They're not going to just put money in earmark it required reserves, right? You guys saw in the video yesterday, money is a hot potato, right? A bank wants to get money and get rid of it as quickly as possible, because when you put money in the bank, they got to pay you interest if it's a savings account. So how do they pay you interest without making interest, right? Like getting interest. So they're not going to put any money in required reserves that's stagnant if they don't have to. So yeah, the reserve requirement would obviously be 0.1. or 10%. I usually write in percent form. B, assume that Louis walks into the bank and withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account at this bank. All right, so again, demand deposits is what a checking account, right? Synonym for checking account, right? So we need to take $5,000 out of our demand deposit, all right? Because the total value of all the money in checking accounts would decrease, right? Because Louis took $5,000 out of his checking account. So this number is going to go from $100,000 to $95,000. Okay? See what I did there? He took money out of his checking account. So the value of all checking accounts would have to decrease. The amount of money in checking accounts would have to decrease because Louis just got paid some cash. All right? Now at this point, it is not balanced, right? Because we have to pay the man, right? We have to pay Louis his cash, right? So if I'm the bank, how do I pay Louis cash, right? Well, we have $15,000 in cash right now. We have $10,000 in cash we're not really supposed to touch, and we have $5,000 in cash we're free to do whatever we want. All right. So if I'm the bank teller, right, I'm going to take cash out of excess reserves first, and I'm going to pay Louis his $5,000 that the bank is liable to pay him, right? Because that's money that he put in his checking account, right? So we have to make sure we pay Louis. All right. So what I did is I decreased demand deposits by $5,000, right? And then I decreased excess reserves by $5,000 because we got to give him $5,000 in cash. What is left to do, people? What is left to do? Because at this point, everything's balanced. Let's see if anyone's tracking. What is one thing that I have forgotten to do at this point? There's one more number I need to change. There's one more number I need to change. A lot of students would stop right here and then attack the questions. What other thing should I change here? What other things should I change here? Let's get the glasses on. Very, very good. Very, very good. And Luke is on his game, right? The required reserves. Is required reserves right now 10% of demand deposits? Because it has to be. At all times, it has to be 10% of whatever money is in demand deposits. And right now, it is not. It's greater than 10% of demand deposits. So what I'm going to do, again, if I'm the bank teller, right, is I'm going to open up the required reserves, the vault, right, and I'm going to have to take $500 out of required reserves because it doesn't have to be in there. Why would I keep it in there, right? And I'm going to put that into excess. I'm going to take 500 out of required reserves, and how did I know to take 500 out, right? What is 10% of 95,000? It's 9,500. So that is all that is required. So anything that's more than required, any excess, right, would have to go into excess reserve. So I'm going to put that back in here. And there we go, right? Everything is balanced. It's 95,000 each side. Required reserves is 10% of demand deposits, and whatever was left over is in excess, right? There's not always going to be money in excess. All right, so now let's hit up these questions. By how much will MITera's bank reserves change based on Louis' withdrawal? All right, so they were not specific on excess reserves or required reserves here. They just said reserves, right? So assume they're talking about total reserves, cash. How much did MITera's bank's cash change based on Louis' withdrawal, right? Total cash. Well, beforehand, right, they had $15,000. They had to pay Louis $5,000. So that's going to be how much their reserves changed by, right? It's going to decrease by $5,000. They lost $5,000 in cash because Louis took $5,000 of cash out of his checking account. What is the initial effect on the withdrawal on the N1 measure of money supply? People, this question is asked every single bank balance sheet. Every single bank balance sheet. And of course, I'm going to ask it on your Unit 4 test. People, please never get this wrong. If someone withdraws money from their checking account or they deposit money in their checking account, that would never change the M1 measure of money supply. Because remember, the M1 measure of money supply is currency, right, cash and coin, money in checking accounts, and then also traveler's checks, which we never deal with really anymore, right? But all we did was we changed the composition of M1, right? We just changed money went from our checking account to our, in this case, money went from our checking account to cash. If we deposit money, money goes from cash to checking account. All of those are included in M1. The value of M1 would never change, right? So the answer is unchanged, and I explained it by saying both demand deposits, checking account, right, and cash are both components of M1. So the value of the M1 measure of money supply would definitely not change. Nice try, right? They're going to ask you that every single time. There's no way should you ever get that wrong, right? And seen it so many times. Okay. And then last one, it says, as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserve? So this says new value, all right? So a couple things, right? Sometimes they say new value, and sometimes they say change, right? Make sure you specifically look at what are they asking about. Before they said change, so I said decrease by 5,000. If they said what is the new value of reserves, right, the answer would therefore be 10,000. I'm talking about BI earlier, right? So make sure, does it say change, right, or new value, right? So this one says new value. What is the new value of excess reserves? It'd be $500, right? A lot of students probably put $0 for that because they left this $10,000, I would imagine, when they took this FRQ, way back in the day, all right? They're seeing, did you make this right? Did you make this 10% of this? So the answer is $500, okay? C, assume that the next day John withdraws, right, from MIT or bank an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves, assuming that no loans are called in, right? In other words, no one's paying back their loans at the current moment. How are they going to cover their required reserves, right? So imagine, John walks in and withdraws like $7,000, right? And when you do the math, required reserves is less than what is 10% of whatever's in demand deposits, so obviously they have no money in excess, right? They're currently facing a penalty if they don't get money very, very quickly, right? So when we talked about monetary policy on Wednesday, how do banks get money, right? If they don't have money, if people aren't putting money in the bank and more people are taking money out of the bank than what they're putting in, right? They have two options. Banks can either borrow money directly from the Federal Reserve, right? And the interest rate that they pay is called the discount rate. But yeah, any sort of private bank can call up the Fed and be like, hey, we need money. They're going to have to pay an interest rate for that. The Fed's not just going to give them free money, even though they kind of do, right? Like 0.25% sometimes. But they can borrow money from the Fed, or they can borrow money from a private bank, right? They can borrow money from another, nearby bank. That way, the Fed isn't in their business, and they just, can borrow from like Comerica Bank, right? And the interest rate that bank charges the bank from borrowing money from them is called the federal funds rate. You don't have to put that in your answer, but I just wanted to put that in there for a little review, right? The Fed can directly change the discount rate. The Fed can't directly change the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is what interest rate that banks charge one another, but they can influence it, obviously, through open market operations. People, if you guys got questions, make sure you guys you put in the chat, right? You guys are really shy. But that was our first one. That was our first bank balance sheet. Isn't that hard? No. And again, the more you do of it, the easier it's going to be, because again, you're going to see that these questions kind of are all the same generally. All right. Let's do another one, right? So this bank balance sheet's got a couple more things on it, right? We got demand deposits again, which is a liability. We got owner's equity, which again is a liability. We got assets, what the bank owns. They have $2,000 in required reserves. Right now, they don't have any excess reserves. So if you were to walk in the bank right now, like they can't lend up anything, right? They would be like, sorry, we can't give out any loans right now because we don't have any cash, right? We can't unless someone deposits more cash and this value goes up. Right now, so far they've given out $8,000 in customer loans, so customers are paying that back over time. What you see here for the first time is this bank owns bonds, right? I told you guys that banks can buy whatever investments they want, right? They can buy, real estate and things like that. So this bank bought bonds, right? They bought bonds from the federal government, and they're currently holding $7,000 worth of bonds, right? And then also the building and fixtures and other things that the bank owns, maybe they paid it off, for that commercial space, right? They own that at $3,000, right? Again, things that they're putting on here that you're never going to have to deal with, but. Okay, anyway, so it says, based on Sewell Bank's balance sheet, calculate the required reserve ratio. Again, generally, it's always the first question. It's just whatever is required reserves divided by demand deposits. So 2,000 divided by 10,000 would be equal to 20% or 0.2. So the reserve requirement in this case is pretty high. Banks have to hold 20% of all money in checking accounts in required reserves. So that's just A, right? B, suppose that the Federal Reserve buys $5,000 worth of bonds from Sewell Bank. What will be the change in the dollar value? Now, what is the new dollar value? What is the change in the dollar value for each of the following immediately after the purchase? Not over time, immediately after the purchase. So here's what's going to happen, right? They are selling their bonds, right? The bank is selling their bonds. The Fed is buying the bonds. the Fed is buying the bonds back, right? Like, hey, you have $7,000 worth of bonds. The bank chose to sell them, and therefore the Fed's buying them back. So what is the bank going to get for $7,000 worth of bonds if the bank or if the Fed buys it back from them? $7,000 in cash, right? Well, actually, hold on, sorry. They only bought $5,000 worth, not all of it. Okay, but yeah, they're going to get $5,000 worth of cash for the $5,000 sale of bonds back to the Fed, right? So this number is going to go from $7,000 to $2,000, right? And then where are we going to put that $5,000, people? We're going to put in excess, right? We're going to put in excess reserves because they're not going to put it in your checking account, right? That'd be really nice for them to put $5,000 of their own money, right, into your checking account. That'd be pretty nice. Are they going to put in required reserves? No, right? They're not going to put any money in required reserves that they don't have to. They currently have 20% of demand deposits, and that's all that is required, right? That money is always going to go all straight into excess. If they sell their own investment, their own asset, and they get cash for that, they're going to put in excess reserves, right? And that'd be pretty smart in this case because that way they have some money that they can lend out and make more money on and profit maximize. So what is the change in the dollar value? Excess reserves increase by $5,000. People, if you put $5,000 as your answer here and you didn't put increase, right, you would actually get it marked wrong, okay? Make sure you put increase by $5,000, all right? What is the change? Now, what is the new dollar value? What is the change? It increased by $5,000, all right? And then what will be the change in the dollar value? Demand deposit is zero, right? Again, they're not... they're not going to put money in your checking account, right? Based on their own investment. That'd be pretty, absurd. All right. It'd be nice though, but all right. So C says calculate the maximum amount that the money supply can change over time. People, these are the questions that I gave you yesterday, right? If someone deposits money in the bank, what is the maximum change in the money supply over time? If the Fed buys or sells bonds, what's the maximum change in the money supply over time, right? So in this case, the Fed bought $5,000 worth of bonds, right? So we need to figure out that money multiplier. So it's 1 over the reserve ratio, 1 divided by 0.2. So the money multiplier is 5, right? 0.2 goes into 1 5 times. So when they bought the bonds, right? This was not money at the time. This was $7,000, but they bought $5,000 worth of bonds. That was just a piece of paper that said how much value it has. Right, that was not money. They put $5,000 of new money in the system that wasn't M1 money before. Government bonds are not M1 money. So they put $5,000 of new money, cash, into the system, and that $5,000 in cash is going to get multiplied by the money multiplier 5 times, which is going to equal $25,000. You have to make sure you say increase because we're buying bonds. If we're selling bonds, if the Fed was selling bonds and they're issuing bonds and they're taking money out of the system, that would decrease by $25,000, right? So the answer is increase by $25,000. And I showed my work. It doesn't say explain, you don't have to, but just so you can look back at this if you need to. All right. D says, when the Federal Reserve purchases bonds, what will happen to the price of bonds in the open market? Well, that's what we just did. That's what we just did, right? When the Fed buys bonds, that was this, right? When the Fed buys bonds, it's going to increase the money supply. And if money supply increases, interest rates decrease. And if interest rates decrease, right, bond prices have to go up, right? Because if you have the old issued bond at a higher rate than what's currently being issued by the Fed, and you wanted to sell it privately, people would be willing to pay more for your bond now because if they wanted to buy that same bond, they're offered a lower rate by the Federal Reserve. So your bond is definitely more attractive, so it's going to increase in value. The bond price is going to increase. Now, this one says explain, and a sufficient explanation actually is just simply saying whatever happens to interest rates. If you make mention of whatever happens to interest rates, that is actually a good explanation, and that will be good enough for 2 points here. Bond prices increase, right, because interest rates decrease. All right, last but not least is that question again. If someone deposits money into a bank, or if they withdraw money from a bank, right, their checking account, what's going to happen to the M1 measure of money supply? It's not going to change, right? Again, because M1 counts money in checking accounts and cash and coin and traveler's checks, right? But again, if we're moving cash and coin to our checking account or taking money out of our checking account and converting that to cash and coin, the total value of M1 would always be unchanged, right? There is no change in the M1 measure of money supply. All right, last one. I believe actually is the most recent one asked. I want to say there might have been another one. I'll have to look it up, but this is definitely a little bit more recent one. I think this was one of my first years teaching, I think. But anyway, it says the following is the balance sheet for First Superior Bank. It just says reserves. It doesn't specify required or excess, right? And then we have demand deposits. We have any sort of equity. No one's got any equity put into the business. And right now they currently have $1,800 in loans. Very, very, very small bank here. A very, very small bank. So here's where they threw a curveball, right? People expect every year FRQs are going to get tougher. That's just the nature of AP macroeconomics, right? In most AP classes, right? FRQs over time get tougher, right? So if you're looking at old FRQs back in the day, they're always easier than the newer ones, right? So they're always throwing new curveballs. This was a curveball, right? It doesn't simply say, what is the required reserve ratio? In this case, they actually give you it, right? It says the required reserve ratio is 10%. They give you it, right? And what they want to know is, what is the dollar value of new loans that First Superior Bank can make right now, right? Someone walks into the bank right now, what is the maximum amount of loans that First Superior Bank can give right now, right? Well, if the required reserve ratio is 10%, how much is in required reserves? Because we need to figure out how much is in required, how much is in excess, right? If the required reserve ratio is 10%, 10% of $2,000 is $200. So right now, required reserves is $200, and excess reserves is actually $0. They don't have any money in excess reserves. They don't have any ability to give out new loans at the current moment, right? Unless loans are called in, or they borrow from the Fed, or they borrow from another bank. You guys see how I did that, right? 10% in required reserves. So 10% of $2,000 is $200. So this must be the value of required reserves. So therefore, they have no excess reserves. They have no cash that they have on hand to give out. Excess reserves is the amount of money that they can lend out, right? They don't have any ability to lend out money. So $0. If the reserve ratio is 10%, that means the value of required reserves is 200, right? So therefore, the value of excess reserves is 0. Therefore, they can't lend out any money at the current moment. Mr. Smith deposits $100 of cash in a demand deposit in his checking account, right? At First Superior Bank. So Mr. Smith walks in. Mr. Smith, right? Like the teacher? Do you guys have him? Right, Mr. Smith? Right? Puts $100 of cash into his checking account. What is going to be the change? What is going to be, to calculate the maximum amount of new loans that First Superior Bank can now make. So that's pretty easy, right? If someone walks in the bank and puts $100 into their checking account, you're the bank teller, you receive that $100. Where are you going to put that $100, right? Well, you have to put 10% in required reserves. So I'm going to take 10% of that $100. I'm going to put that in required reserves. So now required reserves is going to be $210, right? And if I put $10 at a $100 deposit in required reserves, that therefore means I have $90 left over, and I'm going to put that in the excess reserves. Of that $100 deposit, I have to keep 10% on reserve, and I'm free to lend up 90% of that $100 deposit. So the amount of loans that I can give out now is $90, like right now, right? I can give out, so after Mr. Smith puts his $100 of cash in his checking account, if someone walks to the bank, I can lend up to a maximum amount of $90 at the current moment. The answer is simply $90. All right? C, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change over time, right? We've done this. We did this yesterday. But they're asking about different things here, right? They're not asking about the change in money supply over time. They're actually going to ask about it down here. They're asking about calculate the maximum change over time in the amount of loans that are going to be able to be given out, right? Well, the initial amount of loans is $90. Based on the $100 deposit, immediately the bank is going to be able to issue out $90 in loans. So all you simply do is take what is the initial amount of lending that can take place, $90, times the money multiplier, which in this case is 10. 1 over 0.1 is 10, right? So the amount of loans over time is going to be $900. I hope that makes sense, right? Someone deposits $100 in the bank, the initial change that I can lend out is $90. I'm going to lend out $90. That person's going to deposit $90 in their bank. The bank has to keep $9 of that. They're free to lend out $81. They lend out $81. They keep a portion, lend out, keep a portion, lend out, keep a portion, lend out, right? It's going to become $900 in total money lent out over time, given this multiplier, right? So if they're ever asking, calculate the maximum change over time in whatever, right, just ask yourself, what is the initial change, right, of whatever they're talking about, times that by the money multiplier, all right? What's the maximum change in the over time in demand deposits? Well, what was the initial change in demand deposits? $100, right? Mr. Smith put $100 in demand deposits, so $100 changed. And then once that's lent out and deposited, lent out, deposited, lent out, deposited, so that last dollar is lent out or deposited, right? So you just take 100 times the money multiplier again, right? So 100 times 10 would be $1,000. That's going to be the total change in demand deposits over time. If it says over time, you're just going to use the money multiplier. And just ask yourself, what is the initial change? And then times that by the money multiplier to get that change over time. D says, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change in the money supply over time. So this is the exact question you guys did yesterday, right? If someone deposits money in the bank, what's going to be the change in the money supply over time? This is the one you have to be careful about, right? Because when he took that $100 in cash, that $100 of cash was already counted in the M1 measure of money supply. This already is counted. This is not new money, right? So when he puts $100 in cash into his demand deposit, there was no change in the money supply. Right? So what is going to be the change in the money supply over time? Again, the initial amount lent out. We put $100 in the bank. They keep $10 of it. They lend out $90 of it. $90 is what the bank is going to create. $90 times the money multiplier, 10. 90 times 10, $900. That's the amount of new money that the bank is going to create. We talked about yesterday, you guys saw on the film, that banks, in essence, right, create money. They expand the money supply due to fractional reserve banking. So I taught you guys two ways, right? Really three ways, actually. But you just take the initial amount that's going to be lent out times the money multiplier, and there's your answer. Or what you can do is you can take the full deposit, $100, times the money multiplier, and just make sure you take out that cash at the end, because we know that that cash was already counted. It doesn't represent a change, right, in the money supply. All right, a change in the money supply. So again, that answer is $900. Kind of confusing, right? It's like 90, 900, 1,900, right? Kind of confusing for students when they first saw this. And the last answer is what I was sort of talking about yesterday, and I was like, you guys we'll talk more about it tomorrow, is what is a reason, or what are some reasons that it never gets to this point, right? Or any of these, right? How can loans never get to a full $900 change, or $1,000 change in demand deposits, or $900 change in the money supply over time? We're assuming that what's going to happen is banks are going to lend out the full amount that they possibly can, and people, when they receive a loan, deposit the full amount of money into their bank, right? If someone walks in the bank and deposits $100 in cash into demand deposits, and then banks just sit on that, and banks never lend out that $90, then the money is never going to get multiplied. It can't, right? They have to lend out the money for it to get multiplied, and it has to get deposited, lent out, deposited, lent out over time, right? So it always says maximum, right? Say the bank does lend out the $90, and then someone just takes that $90 in loans, in cash, right, and just puts it in their pillow, right, and then never put it back into a bank. And obviously, money is not going to get multiplied. So my response was, if banks don't lend out the full amount in excess reserves, or people just hold money and people don't deposit all of their cash into their checking account, right, then obviously the money supply can't expand by the full amount. We're assuming that everything's going to get fully lent out and fully deposited when that happens. One point is earned for stating that the money supply can be smaller than the maximum change if the public holds money or if banks hold excess reserves. They don't lend out or people don't deposit, is the idea. 900, 1,900, it's pretty good. All right, people. I know it went long, but bank balance sheets sometimes is kind of difficult for students, right? Sometimes it's kind of a beast. Hopefully, you're feeling kind of good about it. And we'll see, right? I'll give you guys just one bank balance sheet. I was going to give you two. We'll keep it light on a Friday a little bit, right? So I'll see you guys in Google Meet. I'll post that problem set, and then you guys can ask questions if you have any.